College sports as we know them are about to disappear. For years, college sports have been under attack, from gambling sites, dirty NIL deals, and now schools being allowed to pay athletes directly, threatening the integrity of everything I hold dear. We even have people now cheating in stone scheming, for crying out loud. Is there anything sacred anymore? Long gone are the days when college kids laced up not for the money, but for pride, for the colors, and, let's be honest, to get laid.
Show us your knockers!
Or are they really gone? Did those days even ever existed? In this video we'll trace the history of college sports, the NCAA's rise to power, and how it has slowly lost control of its golden goose. Back in the old days, college presidents knew to some degree about the importance of physical activity in the student regime, but felt this need could be fulfilled with some good old manual labor such as farming, or clearing boulders from a school property. Oh, the children, they yearn for the mines, they said. Eventually, of course, the students grew tired of being used as cheap labor and began creating their own athletic clubs. The very first of these clubs was the Yale Boat Club, founded in 1843. A year later, Harvard followed with its own rowing club, and by 1852 the two schools faced off in what's often called as the first college sporting event in US history. Now, while the race at Lake Winnipesaukee
Lake Winnipesaukee
was organized by students, it was founded by the manager of the Boston, Concord and Montreal Railroad, who wanted to advertise the line's rail service to wealthy clientele in New York and Boston. Harvard ended up winning the race, but not without some good old controversy. Yale accused Harvard of rigging the course, ditching a school to train on it, and paying a non-student coxswain to help them steal the win. And since the event also offered unlimited alcohol, there are some reports of a post-race banquet descending into drunken chaos, but I was not able to verify these claims. Still, it's kinda heartwarming to know that college sports haven't really changed that much in 150 years. During the following years, clubs for newly created sports such as football, basketball, baseball and soccer began appearing in universities all across America. These clubs ran with little to no supervision from the school's presidents, since they viewed them as a nuisance that distracted the students from their classes. This sentiment is better captured in a letter sent by the president of Cornell to the officials at the University of Michigan regarding a football match that read, "I will not permit 30 men to travel 400 miles merely to agitate a bag of wind." Still, presidents put up with them since they seem to be really popular within the student community. However, by the late 1800s, presidents could no longer ignore what these cute little student-run clubs had become. In 1893, for example, 40,000 fans gathered around Manhattan Field to watch a football match between Princeton and Yale. And just 2 years later, the Yale-Princeton-Harvard Thanksgiving games were pulling up to $30,000, which is around $1 million in today's sorry-ass economy, in gate receipts alone. As this sports grew in popularity, presidents began to realize that their reputations were often tied to the success of their athletic programs, even if they had nothing to do with them. Because, let's be honest here, nobody was going around town bragging that their school had produced 3 future Supreme Court lawyers, or that their surgeons had a 60% success rate, which, believe it or not, was actually kinda huge back then. At that point you were essentially putting prime LeBron numbers up. Especially when some hospitals were out there losing 80% of their patients and still calling it medicine. No, what people wanted was to be able to walk into a bar after a 20-hour shift at the good old factory and feel like they had won the game. So presidents stepped in, took control of the independent sports clubs and absorbed them into the school's official structure. When universities took control of athletics, they gained access to alumni and donor money, which massively increased the resources available to sports programs. This money went into building stadiums, improving training facilities, and of course, recruitment. So if you were a president struggling to improve the image of your school and increase donations, you could always throw some money to the athletics department, buy some wins, and everyone would be happy. By the 1900s, the schools were involved in all kinds of dodgy practices, such as hiring tramp athletes, boosting athletic income, helping students cheat in their classes so they remained eligible, and of course using several schemes to pay athletes to play for them. Sounds familiar? Some notable scandals of the time were the University of Chicago paying coach Amos Alonso Stack $2,500 a year and giving him access to an $80,000 trust fund originally reserved to help low-income students, so he could use it to recruit and subsidize athletes. A former student at Yale also uncovered a $100,000 slush fund used to tutor athletes, buy them gifts, and even pay for some of the coaches' vacations to the Caribbean. And while most schools were happy to look the other way when it came to all these sketchy practices, because, well, everyone was involved in them, there was one thing they couldn't ignore. And that was the growing number of kids dying on the football field. During the infamous 1905 season alone, 19 college students died from injuries sustained while playing the sport, which led some schools like Duke, Columbia, and Northwestern to ban the sport once the season ended. This snippet from the Chicago Tribune titled "Football Year's Dead Harvest" mentions the death of 3 high school kids. Carl Osborne, who was tackled, his rib broke and pierced his heart, almost killing him immediately. William Moore, a right halfback of Union College who was killed in a game after his skull was fractured at the line of scrimmage, and Robert Brown, a 15-year-old that got paralyzed from the neck down and subsequently died. The article also shows you the most common non-lethal injuries of that year, which puts into perspective how brutal the sport was back then. The situation actually got so bad that President Theodore Roosevelt, who by the way was a huge advocate of the sport and had this whole let boys be boys mentality, had to step in order to save the game, as the public and school presidents were calling for it to be banned. So, on October 9, 1905, President Roosevelt met with coaches and representatives from Harvard, Yale, and Princeton in the White House, where he asked them to save the sport by reducing the violence in whatever manner they could figure out among themselves. Coach Walter Camp from Yale, better known as the father of American football, dismissed the whole thing as he felt they were destroying the sport he had spent so much literal blood, sweat, and tears to build. Harvard coach Bill Reed, on the other hand, was far more receptive to the idea, in large part because his boss, President Charles Eliot, was one of the leading voices calling for football to be banned. Reed eventually joined forces with other colleges to create a new rule-making committee to rival the one controlled by Camp, and within a few months, the Intercollegiate Athletic Association was born. The IAA guidelines introduced several game-changing rules, such as doubling the yardage needed for the first down from 5 to 10, created a neutral zone between the two sides of the line of scrimmage, banned the flying wedge by requiring 6 men on the line, and established the forward pass to spread the field. During the following years, the IAA would continue to serve as a rule-making committee trying to standardize rules across schools in America, but would do so under a new name: the National College Athletic Association, better known as... Now, the NCAA was a completely different beast back then. Throughout the 1910s and 1930s, it was essentially a glorified hall monitor trying to get all schools to play under the same rules. In order to do so, the NCAA created its own league, which schools could voluntarily join, and began sponsoring championships such as the 1921 National Collegiate Track and Field Championship. Schools eventually joined the league because it provided one set of rules. Back then, each school had their own set of rules, so they had to meet in advance to decide which rules they were going to use on game day, organize game schedules, and also gave the illusion that schools were actually being held accountable. And in the very likely scenario that you got caught breaking any of the NCAA rules, all they could do was to send you a cute "could you please stop cheating" letter. Every single attempt by the NCAA to stop recurring abuses, like the 1948 Sanity Code, which tried to limit financial aid to athletes strictly to tuition and needed-based support, was laughed off by schools since the NCAA had no real leverage to enforce it. So, how did the NCAA went from a wimpy little pushover organization to one of the most hated institutions in America? It was all thanks to this man right here, Walter Byers, who was appointed as the NCAA's first full-time executive director in 1951. Now, you could write an entire book about Byers and his time running the NCAA, and as a matter of fact, he actually did, but his two biggest contributions to college sports were, one, coining the term student-athlete, which will come back in a second, and two, convincing schools to let the NCAA control their TV deals. Now, you might be wondering why on earth would schools agree to such a thing? Well, it all began during the 1951 NCAA convention in Dallas, where members voted 161-7 with 45 abstentions in favor of prohibiting all live television broadcasts during the 1951 season. The decision was made after the NCAA presented a study made by the National Opinion Research Center that, while inconclusive, found enough evidence to claim that televised college football had an adverse effect on the stadium attendance of the games. Schools were afraid of losing one of their main sources of income, and Penn were not willing to find out themselves whether or not the study was right, so they went with it. The decision, however, was short-lived as it was changed to allow one national televised game each week, as fans from all over the country bombarded the NCAA office with angry calls and letters complaining about the decision. And since teams had revoked existing policy that allowed each individual school complete control over the marketing of its own athletic events, the NCAA now had the power to decide which game was getting televised. This arrangement, of course, didn't work for bigger schools like Penn that already had a $150,000 deal with ABC to broadcast all their home games. On June 6, 1951, the University of Pennsylvania decided to rebel by signing a new deal with ABC for $200,000. At the end of the day, this was the NCAA. What were those bosses gonna do about it? Well, the NCAA deemed Penn a member not in good standing, which led to all their opponents dropping out of playing against them. Now, Penn fought hard to find some middle ground, but ended up surrendering on the day of the deadline as they realized missing on the revenue of football season would absolutely destroy their program. This was huge for the NCAA because now they had some real leverage, which buyers used to keep all schools in line and turn the NCAA into a very effective machine. It didn't take long for schools to realize that they had signed a pretty crappy deal, but they were afraid of getting the stick the same way Penn had. It wasn't until the early 80s when the University of Oklahoma and the University of Georgia filed a lawsuit against the NCAA. The NCAA versus the Board of Regents case made it all the way to the Supreme Court, where it was decided that the NCAA's control over TV rights was an illegal restraint of trade. After this, schools and conferences were now free to sign their own contracts, which led to the rise of powerhouse conferences and a massive widening gap between rich and small programs. This gap only grew larger during the 2000s when schools began signing multi-million-dollar deals left and right. The SEC signed a 15-year, $3 billion contract with ESPN and CBS. The Big Ten launched its own network with Fox, and the BCS sold its bowl rights to Fox and then ESPN for billions more. The NCAA then was caught in a tough spot. Schools across the country were complaining about not being able to compete with the powerhouses, yet none of them wanted to give up one of the main sources of that inequality, which was that sweet TV money. So, in order to give every school a chance to recruit top talent, the NCAA cracked down on the recruitment process to ensure schools could offer, at least on paper, the same thing: a scholarship. Any additional perks or gifts were heavily punished, as they could be easily exploited by bigger schools during the recruitment process. Now, while this works on paper, the reality is a bit more complicated. Like, if you are a 5-star recruit, you wouldn't go to Kennesaw State to make it to the NFL just because the dorms are nice. However, even when you go to a big program, there is always the possibility that you get stuck in a never-ending quarterback battle and never see the field, just as it happens to me in that stupid NCAA 26 game.
Bro, I brought the whole fam out there, my homies, bro. I didn't even get in the first half. We win it. Put me in the game, bro.
I swear to you, every single time I step foot in that stupid practice field, I just get the coaches to hate me even more. So yeah, there is a lot of nuance here. This whole policing of the recruitment process is where the NCAA's reputation as a completely ruthless organization came from, as it would punish kids for the pettiest and dumbest reasons. Some of my favorite examples are eating too much pasta, butt dialing a recruit accidentally ruining his eligibility, washing your car with a school hose, sharing a Netflix account with your coach, accepting a free golf cart ride across campus, sleeping on a player's couch, and receiving a $1.50 meal, triggering multiple penalties. Now, most of these cases eventually went viral, making the NCAA look particularly bad, since on one hand it was punishing kids for getting $5 worth of extra cheese, and on the other hand you had coaches making NFL money. This hypocrisy got people to wonder. Now, back in the day, directly paying students was pretty much like marrying your cousin or drinking and driving.
They're making it laws where you can't drink when you want to.
There's nothing legal about it, but people would give you the side eye. So schools had to get creative when it came to paying athletes without technically paying them. Some offered quote-unquote jobs that didn't require any actual work, like being listed as an assistant in the library or on the grounds crew while spending every day at practice. Other schools would hand out no-show scholarships or expense stipends that covered everything from tuition to beer money. This happened in part because every school had its own definition of amateurism, so one school might call a full ride scholarship fair play and another one would call it cheating. The NCAA tried to fix this in 1956 by allowing student athletes to receive scholarships, so, at least on paper, all schools offer the same thing when recruiting players. It also gave schools an excuse as to why athletes weren't getting a share of the revenue they were bringing in, since they were getting quote-unquote paid through their education. Now, as I said before, this term, student athlete, was created by Walter Byers with the help of the NCAA's legal department, and in his own words, quickly embedded into all NCAA rules and interpretations to provide legal coverage. This term came in handy in 1955 when Ray Dennison, a 26-year-old Fort Lewis A&M right guard and World War II veteran, died from a skull fracture sustained during a game against Trinidad Junior College, leaving 3 sons behind. His widow, Billie Dennison, then filed for death benefits, arguing her husband had been acting as an employee of the school when he died. The case eventually reached the Colorado Supreme Court, which ruled in 1957 that she wasn't entitled to compensation because college football players were students that happened to be athletes and not employees. That ruling became the legal foundation the NCAA would use for years to come to avoid paying students, no matter how much money they brought in. During the 80s and 90s, players knew they were missing out on some money, but also knew the cost of going against the NCAA was so high it wasn't worth the trouble. This finally changed in 2009 when former UCLA basketball star Ed O'Bannon sued the NCAA after seeing his likeness used in the NCAA Basketball 09 video game.
I was with a friend and he said that his son had a video game with me in it. Hey, you want to come check it out? You know, so yeah, of course. Left-handed, height, weight, skin color, everything, bald-headed. It was me for sure.
Now, I'm gonna be honest with you. I do think this was kind of a long shot. Like, don't get me wrong, I do see the resemblance, but these are like, what, PS2, PS3 graphics? So it could have pretty much been anyone. Also, a part of me feels that his friend was just trolling him, but that's just me. Now, O'Bannon technically won that lawsuit since in 2014 a federal judge ruled that the NCAA's ban on athletes receiving compensation for their NIL violated antitrust law and agreed that the students were entitled to some form of compensation. However, the NCAA appealed this decision and was able to take down a plan that would have allowed athletes to receive up to $5,000 a year in deferred NIL payments, arguing the judges couldn't dictate a specific payment system. Now, while the lawsuit ultimately failed to allow student athletes to profit from their NIL, it did set in motion a series of events that would lead to this very same outcome. Enter Andy Schwartz, an antitrust economist that had been involved in the O'Bannon case who was looking for a new way to advance athletes' rights after the case had failed. Schwartz met with Senator Nancy Skinner, who believed the NCAA's amateurism model was fundamentally unfair and outdated. She argued that college athletes were generating billions for universities, and yet were the only people in the entire system not allowed to make any money. Skinner framed it as an issue of basic economic and civil rights. If a music major can get paid to perform, or a student can monetize his YouTube channel, then an athlete should have the same freedom. The NCAA, of course, was not gonna go down without putting up a fight, so it went in guns blazing with their greatest hits of the last 150 years. Paying players would destroy amateurism, students already get paid in an education, and it would create an unfair recruiting advantage. This time, however, the mounting legal pressure from the general public and cases like Alston versus the NCAA, which was a recollection of similar cases like the Ed O'Bannon one, and where Justice Brett Kavanaugh stated the NCAA's business model would be flatly illegal in almost any other industry in America, made it so the NCAA lost its 3-0 record in the court. The bill passed the California State Senate 31-5 on May 22, 2019, with the California Assembly unanimously passing it on September 11, 2019, thus enabling student athletes to own their name, image and likeness and profit from them just like any other college student or citizen can, thus opening the floodgates. The NCAA was dealt its final blow last June when it came to an agreement with the 5 power conferences to let schools directly pay players for the first time ever. The deal still needs a judge's stamp, but it settles 3 federal antitrust cases and sets up a $20 million per year revenue share starting in the fall of 2025. As part of the settlement, the NCAA will have to pay $2.8 billion in back damages over the next decade to athletes who competed in Division I from 2016 to today. In exchange, anyone who accepts their share gives up the right to sue the NCAA for future antitrust violations in a classic take-it-or-leave-it move. So, yeah. If you were a Division I athlete anytime since 2016 to today, even if you only touched the field for warm-ups, congratulations, you're getting paid. There are still, of course, some major questions left unanswered. Will athletes now count as employees, or how long will they be eligible to play for? So for now, let's just focus on what NIL deals have already done to college sports. So, how exactly does these new NIL deals work? As I said before, these deals give students the legal right to earn money from their name, image and likeness through brand endorsements, social media posts, autograph appearances, local business partnerships, or even launching their own merch. It also allows them to hire professionals to help with marketing, legal issues, tax law, and all that boring adulting stuff. These deals are overseen by a combination of school policies and state laws. However, in states with no oversight, the NCAA requires universities to write policies for their own athletes. Some schools require students to get business advice or training before making any deals, and reserve the right to keep their athletes from advertising certain products. Now, while most people associate these deals with the likes of Libby Dunn, Caitlin Clark, Arch Manning, or Bronny James, the reality is that most of these kids aren't exactly signing $5 million deals. Some of them are just getting that back however they can. Take for instance Nebraska defensive back the Coldest Crawford, who signed a deal with a heating and cooling company called SOS Heating and Cooling. A guy by the name of Kool-Aid McKinstry went on to sign the most obvious deal in history with Kool-Aid. Some Iowa players made a deal with Iowa Pork to make this very creative ad. Do you remember that Popeyes kid that became a huge meme back then? Well, he also signed a deal with Popeyes. And last but not least, you have athletes with the name Sam signing $10,000 deals with Sam's Club in another no-brainer. It's also funny because many times brands will just hand out money to these kids and let them figure out the whole marketing by themselves. Like Michigan State punter Matthew Coughlin, who made this tweet to promote the Locked on Spartans podcast, proving there's no such thing as bad publicity. The reality is that for most athletes, an NIL deal means free meals, local sponsorships from small businesses, or a few $100 a semester, which, you know, is fair. Now, for the top 1% of the athletes, these new NIL deals have made it so that sometimes it is more profitable to stay in college rather than trying to go and get a professional deal. Take the case of Shedeur Sanders, who as a quarterback for Colorado had his NIL valued in an estimate of $6.5 million. Compare this to his 4-year rookie contract as a 5th rounder for the Browns, worth around $4.6 million. Now, we all know money isn't exactly a problem for Shedeur here, but it does illustrate why some quarterbacks are now more hesitant to leave the security of college and that NIL money. Like, if you are a Heisman winner, then entering the draft is a no-brainer, but if you are an average quarterback starting for a D1 school with a solid NIL deal, then trying your luck at the draft might not be worth the risk, or, you know, the embarrassment, as it just happened to Shedeur. And once again, this is a good thing. As Nick Palazzo puts it, with strategic partnerships and endorsements, college athletes can now earn significant income. This financial reward is coupled with the opportunity to complete their education, offering a balanced approach to career development. Is there a dark side to all of this? Well, yeah. You got NIL collectives that gather funds from alumni, local businesses, and donors to pay athletes to appear in everything from ads, charity events, or promote stuff in social media, and then use these deals as a recruiting incentive. There are many of these collectives, and pretty much every school has their own, so let's just go with the Spire Sports Group that has generated over $30 million in NIL deals for the University of Tennessee through partnerships with the Athletic Collection, Force Factor, and the Funderburg family McDonald's. Players now move through the transfer portal looking for the schools with the best NIL packages, making the whole thing indistinguishable from any other free agency, turning sports into the minor league teams they were always supposed to be. And last but not least, the new revenue sharing agreement threatens the existence of less popular sports, as schools might funnel more resources towards highly commercial sports such as football and basketball. And the funny thing of this whole thing is that one of the main reasons why this happens is because not every state has laws to regulate these new NIL deals, meaning that each school has its own parameters of what's fair and what's not. So technically we're back to the good old days where every single school had its own definition of amateurism, because time is a circle and sports were doomed from the beginning. I know that throughout this video the NCAA gets a lot of hate, and to be fair, most of it is well deserved, but it has the impossible mission to make college sports fair for everyone when some schools are sitting on multi-million-dollar TV deals, have access to billion-dollar booster networks and facilities that look like spaceships, while others have to play in a cold Tuesday night in Ypsilanti in front of 14 people and a raccoon while the scoreboard is on fire. I'm sorry, it's just that I really love this tweet so much. I feel like it's the perfect roast of what college football has become. In its entire lifespan, the NCAA has gone from being this sorry-ass organization that no one took seriously, all the way to one of the pettiest organizations in America and everything in between, and at no point they were even remotely close to making college sports a level playing field. So this whole thing really comes down to what you want college sports to be. Do you want it to be this extracurricular activity that students do for the pride and the colors? Well, then drop the TV deals, bring out the crappy steel bleachers, pay coaches the same you would to the average school teacher, and then you'll see who's really there for the love of the game. But if you want it to be this nationwide, larger-than-life event on Saturdays where Home Depot gives out hundreds of thousands of dollars just for kicking a field goal, then you're gonna have to accept that there's nothing amateur about the NCAA. You would have a better chance of landing a plane than successfully running a D1 offense. If you wanna see what real amateurism looks like, then go watch a game from your under 37 league. At some point, the NCAA is gonna have to accept that college football is a professional commodity and will have to treat it as such with some form of salary cap to keep things competitive. But what do you think, dear viewer? Is this really the end of college sports or the beginning of a new era of competitiveness where anyone can beat anyone because anyone can invest in their favorite teams? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.